In the TNT area of Point Pleasant at 11:30 p.m. on the evening of November 15th, 1966, two couples, the Scarberrys and the Mallets, were driving around looking for fellow night owl friends at the local Lover's Lane to no avail. However, Linda Scarberry looked out of her car, discovering to her immense surprise that two very large red eyes were looking right back at them. The eyes belonged to a being with a grayish coloration that stood like a man, that soon revealed a pair of bat like wings when the couples drove away from it in fear. Traveling at over 100 miles per hour, the couples attempted to flee the beast, but found, to their horror, that it was following them at the same speed without flapping its wings. This chase lasted until the couples made it to the city limits of Point Pleasant, where the being disappeared from their sight. They then rushed to the courthouse, alerting a local deputy, Millard Halstead, to their plight, who, knowing them well enough to understand they wouldn't be lying about this, investigated the area with them, finding nothing except immense audio feedback that had never happened before when he attempted to make contact with dispatch. Unnerved, they all returned to Point Pleasant, being among the first witnesses to the entity known as Mothman. Here we have one of the most popular creatures of the night that blends the line between cryptid, paranormal entity, potential extraterrestrial, or something far beyond our limited understanding, which we will be discussing tonight on Friday Night Frights. I'm your host, Christian Ashley of Systematic Ecology, here to terrify and instruct you all on the weird, unusual, fascinating, fantastical, and unexplainable things that may or may not lurk out there in the world. I am joined tonight by my friend and the first guest that we have on the show, Joe Day. How's it going, Joe?
What's up, buddy? And real quick before we get going, the obligatory wait for it. What's up, you geeks? Guys, I missed you all. It's always such a pleasure to be able to come back and cut it up.
Absolutely. Like when you volunteered, because guys, by the way, this episode is happening because you voted on it, and this was a tough one because it came between this and Black Eyed Kids, and I think with a final 2 vote lead, Mothman won like 13-11. So if you want to know, oh, if you want to have a say in what's happening next, vote on Facebook on our page, Priest to the Geeks. And then Joe contacted me there and said, like, hey, if you're doing this, I'm going to be on. It's essentially what was said. And I'm like, yes, you are. So I know we both share a lot of love for this stuff. So I'm happy to see you here with me to get all this done. So I'm looking forward to what we have to say together on this very interesting subject, as it were.
Yeah, yeah. I it's cryptozoology is one of those things that I've grown in interest in. I wasn't always as interested in it. I was more interested in stuff like the paranormal and all of that. But like Mothman's one of those that kind of transcended cryptozoology for me. Like I had heard about it before,
Yeah.
really getting into it because it, like you said, it ticks so many of those boxes depending on which theory or which story you read or whatever.
Yeah, I had a hard time when I was like making my list for like, I'm going to do these for cryptozoology. I'm going to do these for paranormal or the unexplained or ufology. I was like, where the hell do I put them off, man? So I said,
Yep.
you know what? Screw it. I'll just put it on paranormal because it's kind of weird and freaky.
Yep.
So, just as a reminder to everyone, our schedule is to once a month cover one of 6 categories: cryptozoology, the paranormal, religious strangeness, the weird and the unexplained, true crime, and ufology. This is our paranormal month of February. Looking forward to this one. So, Joe, you kind of brought it up a little bit earlier, but like, do you remember when you first encountered the Mothman?
2002, the movie The Mothman Prophecies. That was my first exposure to the creature because as I've talked about, for long-time listeners of SG, they know I'm a huge horror fan. And so Mothman Prophecies was one that I watched when I was a kid, and that was the first time that like I had any exposure. And then come to find out it's a book, and like starting learning about the actual story behind the movie, which in retrospect the movie it still holds up in like a schlocky kind of way. Like it is what it is. But yeah.
I get it. I, on the other hand, I was younger. I want to say I was like 8 or 9, and I happened upon a book that used to belong to my dad at my grandparents' house. And this was my introduction to, I think we talked about this on our cryptozoology episode for SG, um, where I got introduced to Bigfoot. I got introduced to the Loch Ness Monster and
Yep.
sea monsters and all this. And Mothman was a part of that. And it's like, this is a weird thing. Does this actually happen? What's going on? I did watch the Mothman Prophecies when it came out, and as someone who is more on the investigative side of things and hoping for an answer, that movie did not satisfy me for at 12 years old. It doesn't really satisfy me now, but I appreciate it more now that I know, because I've heard an interview with the director what he was going for. Because I
Yep.
mean, at the end of reading the Mothman, prophecies, you're not really left with here's a hard concrete fact of everything that's going on. So
Um,
he couldn't, in good faith, do that for the film either. So I get it.
yep.
That's just me hating ambiguity.
Yep. Yeah. It's it's a daunting task whenever you hit a story like this. For me, my version of a movie like this that takes a famous story was The Exorcism of Emily Rose. And
Ooh,
so like that was my on ramp into the idea of directors trying to create something out of stories like this, because there's only
yeah.
so much that you can do without going into the realm of just making stuff up and just throwing stuff into the story for the sake of the movie and all of that. So yeah, it I can appreciate the a director trying to stay honest to the story, at least as best you
Yeah. So we mentioned how we got into finding the Mothman, but like, what is it about him that we find interesting?
can. So I remember the first time, like the first thing that I had ever heard about the Mothman was the shape of it, like the actual physical, like that aspect of it. And then I remember in a different conversation hearing about how it was like a harbinger of doom. And then I remember
Mm,
hearing in a different conversation the theory behind him eliciting fear and anxiety and the connection between Mothman and sleep paralysis, which for those of you that don't know is an actual thing that is like, a full-on thing that you can be diagnosed with, which it usually goes hand in hand with sleepwalking, which both of those things are a thing for me. And so somebody made an offhand comment to me about maybe it's a Mothman, and I'm like, I thought that was a harbinger of doom. And then I'm like, wait a minute, there's like 8 different things that are associated with this entity. And it's, I don't know how else to say it other than the fact that with the Mothman, the thing that I find interesting is that there's almost this air of mystique that exists with the Mothman that doesn't really with other cryptids. Like Bigfoot, you can kind of call it a hairless gorilla in a lot of regards. Like yes, I'm one of those people that like I have my opinions about the tapes and all of that kind of stuff, or Loch
yes.
Ness, or these different things. Like you can kind of put things into there that like rationalize what you see, or different things like that. Whereas with Mothman, you can't quite pin it down to something very specific, and the weird stuff that's associated right at the same time. It's just enough to make you go, hmm, you know.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. This is one of those stories you like learning, oh, some fanciful creature that was seen in West Virginia in
Right.
66 and 67, then it's gone. But then you get a little deeper, like, who is Indrid Cold? Why are the men in black showing up here? Why are all
Yep.
these creepy phone conversations happening where there's someone laughing behind the scenes or there's static on police radio comms? Like, what is happening? What is a UFO flap? I had never heard that term before until like reading through stuff like this. And then the Mothman is all around us. So what does that make it or him or whatever the heck it is? Is it allied with these things? Does it hate them? Is it a harbinger of doom? Is it in its own cryptic way trying to prevent the Silver Bridge collapse from happening and failing miserably because no
Yep.
one stuck around to actually talk to it because they were so afraid of seeing it? Like what what, why, how, all these things. And we don't really get a lot of answers. And as someone who hates that, that's infuriating, but it still compels me. Like,
Yeah.
what could those answers have been?
Right, right. So I'm reminded of a a skit that I saw semi recently of a comedian who's like, "You don't believe any conspiracy theories? Like, that's a bold move to not believe any conspiracy theories. Like, you just believe that the government's getting it all right and not doing anything wrong." And I laugh. I bring that up because I'm like, you hit on it with the Men in Black stuff and like the conspiracy stuff that centers around Mothman and all of that. That like, within, obviously within reason,
Yes.
you look at a situation like this and you're like, do I believe that there's a world where something like this could be a thing and that the powers that be would want to like cover it up or be involved or something along those lines? I'm not saying that I'm like into conspiracy theories or anything. I haven't ruled it out. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And that's one of those things that I think for me, one of the things that I find the most interesting is, like I said, with the other ones, you can kind of like, I am what you would call a curious skeptic, right? My years of paranormal study, my years of paranormal investigations, and all of that kind of stuff have left me with a certain level of openness mixed with a certain level of skepticism. And these other creatures, I'm very, very quick to grab something from the toolkit to be like, nope, 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 nope. I if it is folklore, for those of you that are given to clipping things out, here you go. If the Mothman is given to folklore, then this is one of the most resilient pieces of folklore that I have ever seen.
Hmm. Yeah. It's maddening how a lot is happening here. And I think that example of the skit was spot on. It's like, can you honestly look me in the eye and say you think everything is running smoothly? No one is behind the
Yeah.
scenes doing anything out of the ordinary. Like, forget
Right.
paranormal and all that mess. Like, everyone's doing their job. I can't believe that conspiracy theory.
I
I'd much
can't.
rather believe the others.
Yeah.
So, but then you get something like this, which is like, okay, how is this possible? Who stands to gain from it? Is there anything here? Is the covering up because, hey, we don't understand what's going on here and we don't want you to know we don't understand? Or is it we're
Right.
working alongside these things or what have you? Or is this just a giant hoax that has been proliferated for so long and Keel is just a master wordsmith? And we'll get to him because Mothman Prophecies being my main source for a lot of what happens here.
Right.
Yeah, it's all that wrapped together. It's like this world is wild and wacky, and this is one of the wild and wacky times that has gotten a lot of press. So let's gotten a lot of scrutiny. What's going on? So anything else before we head forward to like describing the Mothman himself?
Yeah, no, I'd say let's jump into it.
Okay, so what you see here is kind of the TNT area, which is one of several spots in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where we're at. So before we describe the Mothman, we kind of have to describe our setting. This is right on the border between West Virginia and Ohio. Um, I have been here before, very briefly. I had, after college, gone with a group of friends to West Virginia to stay at a place. I was like, man, you know what else is in West Virginia? Point Pleasant. But you know what? I didn't know that Point Pleasant was on the other side of the state. And there's a part of West Virginia where you're not supposed to travel through because of radio frequencies and stuff like that. So it took me 5 hours to get there, realizing I didn't have the funds for a hotel and the museum was closing in 3 minutes. So all I did was I snapped a picture of me with Wolfman and then left, which unfortunately wasn't able to do anything else. So this is, I forgot to actually put my photo there, but this is kind of the statue that's been brought up in the city proper. Uh, not really what I would think it would look like, but this is someone else's interpretation of something that we don't have photos for. So let's throw a little grace that way to them. But as far as Mothman himself is considered, to this point, this is in the 60s, Cold War is going on. This site, the TNT area in West Virginia, in Point Pleasant, has gone out of disuse for about ever since World War II stopped, because that's when they started it up for production in the midst of that. But now the jobs had gone away. No one needed it as much. So it just kind of became a local lover's lane
Yeah.
where people would go and do what they do for those locations. But for Mothman, as noted in the opening story, one of its most striking features are its large red eyes that glow in the dark, regardless of whether light is being directed at them, as would be typical from eyeshine. Now, for those of you who don't know what eyeshine is, nocturnal animals, for the most part, have the ability to see in the dark a little better, can reflect light back at you. If you ever have seen, if you ever have a flashlight out at night, walking in the woods, you've seen an owl or a deer, they will have eyeshine of different coloration. And as part of this is also sometimes said to have had like this almost hypnotic gaze that when witnesses see it, they describe it as hard to look away from. So whether that's part of a paranormal nature or some other ability it has, who knows? It is described as being anywhere. If you have anything you want to say, feel free to interrupt me, Joe. Uh, Anywhere from being like 6.5 to 8 feet tall. Some would even say even taller. I think most of the reports that kind of averages out around this area. Its wingspan is massive, and more often than not, it's described as being very bat-like in appearance, which is kind of, there's more butterfly in that statue right there, but I get what they're going for. And flies very swiftly, oftentimes not using its wings, which would be next to impossible from what I understand of flight that birds
Yeah.
would have to do.
Yeah, you would, because what, so for any flying device or flying creature, it works off of propulsion. Unless you are already at a high level and you can glide on the airstream, which that's not what we've heard of Mothman, that it's not utilizing current airstreams, it's self-propelling without actual like means of propulsion, which fundamentally breaks down the laws of physics. And that's one of the things that catches my attention as far as all of this goes, is it's there's a certain measure of continuity to what we hear about that isn't present with other cryptids.
Yeah, it's one of those fascinating things because this breaks everything we know about nature if this is possible,
Yep.
unless there's some type of technology at play, or it's using physics that don't align with our reality and it comes from somewhere else, or it's just something we haven't discovered yet and it's able to do that. So this the from the descriptions, this pretty much happens all the time. So is that just something they all decided, hey, I'm telling my story and that's going to be a part of it? Is it something that actually happened, so they're describing it? What's going on here? um, Go ahead.
So as somebody that's in the academic world, I'm always counseling folks to utilize the scientific method. Do not make the assumption that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. That's a sloppy way to approach science. And with something like the Mothman, when you look at um, species discovery, generally there is a pretty standard mode in which new species are discovered. There's it's there tends to be some kind of reliable data that can be drawn. It's part of why it's actually some of the exact reasons why I dispute some of the other cryptids that exist that are just unknown um, species and all of that kind of stuff, because it breaks the fundamental um, laws of science and the standards, I should say, not laws, because you can't,
Yes.
nothing, just about nothing in science is law. It's all theorems that are tested to be reliable. And so with with this, I don't think we can be bold enough to say that this fits the criteria for an unknown species, which leads to my question of, when we consider Point Pleasant, when we consider the fact that it is in an area, just as a large map, you kind of hit on it before, of a high amount of radio interference, signal interference as a whole. There's a heightened level of folks in that area reporting cases of cancers and things like that. You couple that with a prime area for World War II ammunitions holdings because of the radio interference and not being able to be like it being more easily hidden and off the grid and all of that. And then you couple that with that being the origin point for a creature like this. My question then becomes, we understand that so kind of the basis of SG, right, is that we're working off of a generally Christian worldview. Generally, there's differences, there's this, there's that, there all that kind of stuff, but generally accepted a Christian worldview. Well, part of that Christian worldview means that there are other, we wouldn't necessarily readily call them this, but other dimensions, other planes of existence. We understand it in scripture as heaven above, hell below, because that's the only way that most of the time you can conceive of that notion of it being above or below.
Yes.
So if we've already squared the circle and we're already working off of a premise where we are accepting the idea of a different plane of existence, then what stops us from asking the question, what if this is something that has figured out how to traverse planes of existence? Here's a follow-up to that, to go back to where you're at in the conversation about the physicality of the beast. What if the wings, they're not specifically for flight, that it has the ability to fly without use of the wings? What if the wings are the thing that causes it to change vibrational patterns to go from one plane to the next plane to the next plane? Because for those of you that don't know, atoms vibrate at a very specific frequency. If you figure out how to change the frequency of the atoms, then there is a theory that exists in quantum physics that you will be able to move from one plane of existence to another plane of existence.
Yeah. That's another reason I wanted you on, because I never would have said that. It's like, I appreciate science. Biology is probably as far as I go, but physics, chemistry, anything that involves higher level math beyond a 6th grade level, screw it. Doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist.
It's all black magic. I'm burning you at the stake. No, but no, I like that, because I need that thought process here. It's like, if it had just been me on here, I would have walked past that. But no, you brought attention to it, because it is possible, if these certain standards are met, for this to work. We can't just discount it out of hand because everything else that we see here says no.
Right. Yeah, that's the beauty of cryptozoology and paranormal research. Is, if I am all for, when you approach these topics, approach them in a posture that says, I need to gather the facts and in order to prove something as a viable theory. That is a healthy approach to skepticism.
It's
approaching it from the standpoint of, I'm going to force you to show me that you are real, or that this thing is real, or whatever, then your own bias is going to kick in. And when it comes to science, I really would suggest folks approach science in an inquisitive way. Ask every single question, because I can't remember off the top of my head who said this originally, but when you eliminate the everything that is what is it? When you remove everything remarkable and you remove when you remove everything that's impossible, what's left is the possible, which might be a dumb statement to some, but I actually think now that I'm thinking about it, I think that was Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, Arthur Conan Doyle.
Arthur Conan Doyle. But that there's something to that. That if that like hitting these kinds of things from a standpoint of what if we're willing to ask questions, and like you said, if we explore the idea of theoretical physics, then there is a theory for everything that I just said. That in nature, we cannot point to anything that definitively shuts down those possibilities.
When it comes to mammals, you know what mammals are known for? Live birth. Except for monotremes.
Right.
We have echidnas, we have platypi, platypuses, how the heck you want to say it. If we had, as the researchers normally did back in the day, when they were exploring Australia, New Zealand, and if they had found this wacky thing right here, and they said, you literally made that thing up, you combined a bunch of animals together, it's some chimera that doesn't exist in nature.
Yeah.
Except it does. We just had to bend the rules for how things work.
Yep.
So it's easy to say, and it's normally a right thing to say, this is how things work, therefore anything that goes against the grain isn't right. Except the exceptions. So we got to be careful about that.
Exceptions are exceptions until they are proven to exist.
Yes.
And so if we are already working off of a basis that accepts the supernatural, then we've already started the process of at least being authentic enough to the science and the realities of existence that we do not really understand most of how things work. We understand certain theorems, but there's a reason why they're all theorems. Is something happened along the way that broke them and created exceptions to the rule, and thus they cannot be definitive law.
Yes. Now, you would obviously know more about this than me, but the reason, because there's a law of gravity, is a theory of gravity. And that, if I remember correctly, the theory is because as far as we can prove within the universe, this is how gravity works. So that's why it's a theory, not a law. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, science already does things like that. So that's why we need to think on those things. Okay, if scientists say this is still just a theory, it's not because, oh, we haven't proven it. It's because, no, as far as we are aware, this is how things work. We have not been to the center of a black hole or a white hole. We have not been to the inner workings of Jupiter right now and not been crushed to death. We don't know how things work there. We think we do, but we haven't proven it yet.
Right. There's an educated hypothesis to those different things used generally reached by some kind of tool, some kind of machine or something that has given us, okay, because of X, we can infer Y. And the extraordinary works largely off of the same basis, because we can see X, then it stands to reason that we could say Y is possible.
Yes.
And right. I would argue that the onus is on the scientific community to state that it's not possible. Because then, unless you prove that it is not possible, then it remains a possibility.
Yes. And unfortunately, we are limited by the time that we're in. Like, I mean, there was a time when oxygen didn't exist. It was phlogiston, and or how the heck you pronounce that word? I've only seen it written down. But
Yep.
as science marched on, we recognized, okay, this thing we were saying isn't a thing. It is actually this thing. Let us correct ourselves, move on, and then figure out what else we have to figure out.
Right.
So go ahead.
Well, it's just interesting when you consider when we look at things like this, and we're so for those that are so quick to dismiss this as a myth or whatever, then the only thing that I would have to say is it wasn't like as a species, we are not that old in the grand scheme of things.
Mhm.
Now, different people would argue just how old we are. That's an entirely separate conversation.
We
But
can't get sidetracked.
yeah, it wasn't horrifically long ago that folks thought that the weather was due to like gods and all of that. That like the earth was the center of the universe and all
Mhm.
of those kinds of things. So put this into context to where we're at in the history of civilization and in the context of what we already are have established as being something that is generally acceptable as per a Christian worldview.
Yes. All right. So I'll go ahead and finish off the rest of the characteristics, and we'll move on from there. Just a couple more. Yeah, another thing Mothman is said to possess is this high pitched shriek that has caused those who hear it to be immensely disturbed, whether like mentally or like physically. Both have been reported. We've talked about the audio signals; they often get disrupted in its presence. Telephones, radios, other electronic devices. Now, where it got its name is kind of this weird, like it just kind of happened.
Mhm.
I mean, they're kind of looks like moths depending on who's describing it, but it really comes from a newspaper editor from I think Ohio or something like that. It was just like, "Hey, Batman pretty popular right now because Adam West is playing him. So we're just calling Mothman." It's like, sure, that's a good reason as anything, I guess. Now, Joe also brought up earlier this Mothman being a harbinger of doom, and a highly debated interpretation of the creature is to describe it as showing up to foretell of disasters that are about to occur. There have been sightings of it. This occurred before the Silver Bridge collapse in '67. Then we have people saying it appeared in Chernobyl. Someone said it was in New York in 9/11. Someone else saw it in Fukushima. Those I'm a lot more skeptical of those because it fits a narrative
Yeah.
versus like credible reporting. Now, I'm not saying they didn't happen, but I'm my skepticism senses start tingling a bit more about that.
Yeah.
And talking about you earlier, like I like to describe myself. I like to think of myself as like the perfect hybrid of Mulder and Scully. Uh,
Yeah.
is in like I, I, I I'm a skeptic who wants to believe. So you present me something like this, I'm going to go, okay, I don't have proof of this yet, so I'm going to mine the source. But it'd be really cool if it existed. So I kind of hope it is. So whether that makes me not objective, whatever, that's where I'm at. Now, one other thing of note that very often gets brought up whenever you discover the story is some actual history. In 1777, this area was settled by colonist pioneers, and there was a fort nearby where some American militia troops were settled in, and a Shawnee leader, Cornstalk, was murdered there after a soldier had been murdered by Shawnee men, and he had come there originally to be like, "Hey, we don't like the British. We really don't like you either, but we're willing to like work with you because you're here." And due to racial tension that's at the time, misunderstandings abounded. He got murdered by a militia leader there, and with his dying breath, he's reported to have left a curse on the land. Some people say, "Oh, well, this is what it's all about." Like uh, him cursing the land means that the Silver Bridge would fall in 1967, almost 200 years later. It's like, okay, sure, could be. Let's focus on what's actually happening here. But I would be remiss not to mention it because I know a lot of people do really care about that. So that's it for characteristics. Anything else we haven't brought up, Joe?
So I was actually going to bring up the connections with the indigenous culture, and that aspect of it. Um, I think there's a reality, and this is me tipping my hat to where I lean way heavily into um, my acceptance that there are things that we simply do not understand and all of that. I think one of the oh, I think one of the biggest um I don't know what the word is one of the worst things that we do as a society is we are so quick to dismiss specific worldviews because they're different than ours.
Yes.
And I'm reminded of guys like Dr. Michael Heiser and the work that he did. Now I should say Unseen Realm. There's a lot about Unseen Realm that if we were to get into the specifics of, I have really big problems with certain aspects of his teaching, namely how highly he associates with the Book of Enoch and all of that kind of stuff. I think there's just big glaring problems with the depths that like where he tries to reach, but he does bring about this idea of a plurality of gods and a supernatural component to it. And I take it back to the Christian aspect because part of what's baked into SG is that coming at it from as Christians. And I don't think that I think we do it a disservice when we say anything like this that's been seen, if it's real, it's demonic. I think we
Mhm.
do this whole thing a disservice by hitting it from that angle. Just like we do it a disservice by wiping it away and hand waving it away just because it has to do with a different culture's supernatural background. And what gets me about stuff like this and why Mothman makes my brain itch unlike any of the other ones that I can think of is in some ways, I went on for I don't know 15 minutes, probably boring the daylights out of some folks that aren't into science and all of that kind of stuff about how there are theoretical concepts that could say that this could be real that haven't been disproven. Likewise, there is proof text that supernatural entities exist outside of just Yahweh. That there is a
Yes.
reason why the Bible refers to God as the God of God, the King, the God of gods, the King of kings, the Lord of lords, right? That would suggest that there are others and that God is a step above. But that doesn't discredit the fact that there are others. So just because it came from somebody else or some other culture doesn't automatically invalidate the possibility that this is a thing. And so
Yeah.
when we look at something like this coming from an indigenous culture, there's the if we are being articulate to every other piece that we can say, okay, I subscribe to this, okay, I call this valid, okay, this is the premise in which I'm already operating off of, then again, those three words, those three magical words in the scientific method, beyond reasonable doubt. We cannot say beyond reasonable doubt that this is an impossibility just because it doesn't line up with our standard view of the supernatural or different things like that. So for me, I look at that and I'm like, does that make for a killer headline and a killer piece to write a story around and all of that? Absolutely. I didn't just fall off the turnip truck. I understand how to write a compelling line in a book to get people interested and all that kind of stuff for sure. Like I said, this is one of the most enduring pieces of folklore, if it is folklore, that I have ever seen. It is one of the most resilient and compelling that I have ever seen. If this whole thing is ho hunkum and the whole thing is just one giant myth, then my hat's off should I ever hope to be the kind of writer and storyteller that creates something that has endured in the way that this has. But there's enough pieces around it to be like, huh. Now,
Yeah.
mind you, I do think when you start to pull in the bridge collapse and all of that kind of stuff, um, I, I don't know. Like time and chance happens to all. Like I said, like that's scripture says that. So like tragedies happen on a regular basis. So I'm not one to over spiritualize certain things. But at the same token, again, the door certainly at least remains cracked, if nothing else.
Yes. And you brought up a lot of excellent points there. It is so easy from a Western perspective to just knock out anything that doesn't align with our ideology or with the way we believe the world exists, how it does things. When time and time again it is proven, if you listen to the people who live in that area, chances are they know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Why when reports of gorillas came out in Africa, it's like no one believed them. Those
Right.
crazy folks didn't know what they were talking about
Yep.
until we went in and looked at it as, oh, well, we're right to think that there's something there, but forget about what they were saying this whole time. And in that same token, you say, well, maybe there is such a thing as a Mokele Mbembe, a giant dinosaur-like entity as well. Like, well, the natives sure think there's something there. Or you go to other regions of the world, and hey, we've got these crazy stories of giant birds. Well, in New Zealand, there used to be a lot of even larger birds that what were they called? The moa? I can't remember off the top of my head. They have stories that have transcended from the past that said these things were here, and we said those things don't exist. We can look around, we don't see any flying huge birds here. Well, they're there. They just don't exist anymore. It's like the auroch in Europe died out in the 1600s. A giant big cow, even bigger than what we have here. Well, what
Right.
if they said the exact same thing to us? Well, totally, there was these giant cows running around. Well, you should just listen to us because we're Western, by the way, and we know more than you. It's like it's a terrible mind point to have. Now, there's something about skepticism. There's something about, well, we don't know about this yet, so let's verify it instead of just dismissing it out of hand.
Right.
So there's so much wrapped into this. You want to just get into some sightings?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's do it.
Okay. So on that same night that I used in the opening, 90 miles away from Point Pleasant, we have Salem, West Virginia. And in there, Newell Partridge, who was just a business contractor that lived nearby, was watching TV at 10:30 at night, probably a night owl, probably like me, can't go to sleep at that point in time. And his TV just started filling with static. Now, that's something that's not necessarily out of the ordinary, especially with older televisions. It happened every now and then. But then his dog Bandit started howling outside. So, curious, he got a flashlight to locate the source. And as he beamed it out he had a haystack, I think, nearby, about 150 yards away, he saw two large red eyes staring right back at him. So, and I realized I put a typo there that says fun instead of gun. So that's funny. He went to go get his fun by gun. I mean gun, and afraid of what he had seen, and trying to get his dog to come back inside, he failed miserably in both accounts. He just stayed inside the entire night, afraid of what was going on. And one thing that I did neglect to mention in the original story, as the two couples were heading into Point Pleasant, they noticed that there was a dog, a dog's corpse lying in the ground beside the city limits. And then when they came back, it was gone. Was that Bandit? Some people think it is. Now, it is possible, assuming physics work the way that even a dummy like me understands them, it is possible flying over 100 miles per hour to have reached, Point Pleasant all the way from Salem,
Yeah.
because this was about an hour before the events that in the opening.
Mhm.
But the question being, to me, it's like, if that happened, why would Mothman drop the dog off and then take it away when it had all this time to eat it? Like, Joe, what's going on with this story, this eyewitness account?
So, with something like this, you would have to ask the question, what was the point of the creature having the dog in the first place? Because part of it is we would be inclined to try and attribute like what we would consider standard animalistic behavior to the creature, and assume like this is what we know, this is what we would think a predatory creature would do, so thus it doesn't make sense to us that it didn't do that thing. Now that's fine, that to say this is what we would think of as standard predatory animal behavior, and we are confused that it didn't do that thing. Now, what you do with that is what matters. Now, I personally am not of the of like, I do not see that as enough of a reason to dismiss the initial claim. Because if we are already working off of what some of these premises that are already in place, there's a possibility that it could hit 100 plus miles per hour. I certainly wouldn't want to come face to face with something that's red eyes about the size of a human and can fly 100 miles an hour. Absolutely not. But
Fair.
it's not, it's curious and unusual, but not outside of the realm of what is conceivable, or not even not conceivable, but possible.
Yeah, it's assuming animalistic intentions. This is just some being we haven't found out, and for some reason, only for an entire year is when we saw it. Sure, there's a lot of assumptions there.
Yeah.
That it's he could have dropped it,
Yeah.
something like that, and come back for it while in pursuit of these other people. Could have been in the midst of eating it. We don't give a report of all that. But assuming it's not an animal, assuming it's some other being, you could argue demonic, you can argue ultra terrestrial. We'll get there in a bit. Like, if this is the same dog, which is possible, I don't put too much stake into it. It could be one of those things that I see, if this is the same dog, there's intent. It wanted it to be seen, and it also wanted it not to be seen
Right.
after the fact. Once again, assuming a higher intelligence here as a way of connecting those two stories together, maybe hyping up its own legend, or like getting people more interested in it, or some other message that we're just too dumb to understand, and it thinks this is a way of saying hello. Like, what do you feel about that?
So there's two different sides of the conversation to be had here. On one hand, you have the approach of trying to approach this thing as as you would a standard creature, right? And even so, let's play that out here for a second, right? So we have this creature that shows up. We don't know its digestive patterns. We don't know what it views to be the natural order of things. If it was able to cross an interdimensional line, we don't know what creatures exist on the other side of wherever it's from. Maybe oversized dogs are a thing, canines, that it would view as a natural predator.
Mm.
And so thus it takes this dog out trying to uh continue the natural order of things. But maybe it is part insect, in literally like a moth, and is an herbivore and has no interest in eating it, only has an interest in killing it. The other side is, what if it's trying to send a message? Possibly. It's that could be a calling card if the other aspects of the story have any weight of it being a harbinger of doom or something along those lines, or even something that is malicious. So let's say it does have an air of maliciousness, and it says, you know, it's really gonna mess this thing mess these people up if I do this and nobody can explain it by the natural laws of physics. It really depends on whether or not the thing has a higher brain function, or if it's working off of primal instinct. But the thing again to go back to at least there being enough things that make you go, unlike the rest of, like, in a way that other, I would argue that no other form of cryptozoology really does, is it works off of enough premises that are either manipulations or continuations or extrapolations of things that we already see in nature. Things that we already would say, like, okay, this isn't necessarily exactly the same thing, but we understand animalistic behavior could potentially allow for something like this. Now, I will say, I just to be fully transparent, I do think that when we are getting into the sightings portion of it and we get into the dog and all of that kind of stuff, I weigh all of this with the notion that same dog, two locations, 100 mile, all that kind, that all makes for a killer story. That all makes
Yeah.
for a wonderful tale that could very easily be sewn in all of that kind of stuff. The same has to work both ways. If you're willing to accept there's a possibility that this thing exists, then you have to also be willing to articulate the fact that there is a possibility that all of this is, as the French may say, garbage.
Well, speaking of potential persons who could have offered that garbage, why don't we move on to John Keel and Mary Hyre?
Yep.
Now, I did not find a photo of Mary Hyre, but that's good old John. This man fascinates me to no end because if he's a shyster, he's one of the greatest shysters I've ever seen in my life. This man can tell a compelling story. He keeps notes. He goes down and tracks down witnesses who are all verifiable as having been alive. Like, claims to have seen multiple UFOs in all this mess. Claims that he's to have been wiretapped. Claims to have been messed with by third parties or government officials. But oddly enough, I don't think he ever actually saw Mothman himself. But as far as I can recall, without him and Mary Hyre in this story, we don't have the information we have. So I thought doing an episode on Mothman, we kind of have to talk about John Keel and Mary Hyre.
Yeah.
John being a writer for the most part who documented the cases, Mary Hyre being kind of an editor and writer for the local paper in Point Pleasant. And the two of them had both UFO sightings together. She had several Men in Black encounters. Like, unpack them for a little bit, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about, like, if this dude's just a storyteller, right? And is just making this whole thing up. We're talking about one of the most prolific storytellers in in our modern context. Like, this is a guy, and, like, don't get me wrong, he's this dude has, there we go. I'm always bad at that on the air. This dude has a face that you should never play follow the queen, like follow the lady with. Like, this dude's gonna take you for your money. Just saying. He's got one of those faces that, I wouldn't trust. But he took a lot of the pieces and at least got to a point that says, here's everything that we have. Here's all of the pieces of the puzzle. Let me wrap this up in a bow for better or for worse,
Yeah.
that's where we're at. And that aspect of it, either this dude was brilliant, or this dude is one of the most creative minds that the world has ever seen.
Yeah. Without him, we don't have this story the way that we do. This They would have still
Right.
happened, the sightings. No,
Yep.
maybe it would have been a minor footnote in history. Maybe a couple years along, maybe Lauren Coleman or someone else would have said, "Hey, that's kind of interesting," and moved on with their lives.
Right.
But he adds a mystique to this, along with Mary, that just puts a human element into it because
Mhm.
they're on the front lines here as the
Yep.
war is being waged in one of the biggest UFO flaps. For those of you who don't know what that means, it means a period of time when a lot of UFOs are being seen. It could be as long as a month, could be several months, could be years. This typically is known as the Mothman flaps of 1966 to 67, which takes place over a shorter amount of time. But it's still I can't. It, if he's fooled me into believing the things that I believe, my hat off to you, sir. You have scammed me. I'm an idiot for believing you. But there's
Yeah.
such a passion
I
behind what he's doing that I can't say I don't believe him.
Right. There it is, right? Therein lies exactly what is so stinking, like, I am the type that I've seen a lot of life. I've seen a lot of things. I've been on both sides of the con, just to be perfectly honest. I've you know, done a lot of things in my life for better and for worse. So whenever I meet a man who's like, okay, you, sir, have successfully pulled the wool over my eyes. You have successfully turned me into a raging mark. Yeah, all right. Like whatever, like you like, but the thing that I have to ask the question of is, if this dude literally played us all for marks, right? And just took advantage of the moment, took advantage of a lot of things. Dude, he got a lot of things right in one when it comes to scientific theories. This dude masterfully hit so many things that if you look at it, you're like, I can't say no.
Yeah, I agree. And
And that, and
go
I
ahead.
should say, because of the whole UFO thing and the association of it and all of that kind of stuff. The thing that I have to say that I appreciate about this story, if it is a story, like if it is just folklore, if it is just myth, then the thing that I have to say is, while it took advantage of that moment in history, that moment in time, it didn't completely go the same route of, oh, this is just another UFO story. This is just another UFO sighting. This is just another extraterrestrial sighting, because there are so many of those that are all based, if you are into ufology, there is there are a lot of those that you can definitively trace the origin point to that mode of UFO sighting, that mode of extraterrestrial sighting. That's actually why I remain heavily a skeptic to the idea of life beyond, like life on other worlds as we know it in the standard sense. But he did, you know, in a time where people were more open to this idea. At the very least, he capitalized on that moment in history.
I think I would disbelieve him a lot more if this had been like I prefer things, knit up with a bow. Here's the ending. Here's the meaning of the story. Oh, Mothman, he's actually a tall Nordic named Meatmorp, and he's here to tell you that nuclear disarmament is the way to go. Like, because he does it, because he leaves me hanging on a thread. When he, what? The answers, please. I, I tend to believe him a lot more,
Yeah.
which is antithetical to everything I believe. But here we are.
Yeah, I agree. I think we have to at least articulate the fact that we are not given a clear cut standard. This is, this is a nice buttoned up explanation to what it is. That I think is at the very least, if nothing else, if we are approaching this leaning towards the whole thing is mythologized, whatever, then it is a myth that has been given the legs to endure by allowing for a lot of different explanations and stuff like that. There's not some grander, more moralistic tale. There's not a clear, direct cause and effect. It is simply something that could exist outside of the realm of what we understand.
So moving on from there, unless you have something else you want to add, let's go to the Silver Bridge collapse.
Mhm.
An alleged sighting of Mothman. Because I skipped over a lot of sightings because typically what happens is, oh, I saw a bunch of red eyes and they stared at me. It was this big thing that kind of looked grayish and it then flew off and went elsewhere and, did its own
Yeah.
thing. And not saying that doesn't mean they're not real or exciting. It's just that the kind of the same thing together is kind of boring after a while. So we get here, and as far as the Mothman flap, the UFO flaps are concerned, this is where the story ends. Even though there have been people after the fact who have claimed to have seen the beast or whatever the heck it is along the way, like as far as like the main story, this is where it ends. But before the bridge actually falls, several residents of Point Pleasant are reported, including Mary Hyre, having prophetic dreams of the bridge collapsing, people dying in the water, and seeing a bunch of Christmas presents floating around the area. He wrote those down before those happened. So your mileage may vary if that's actually real. We'll move on. On December 15th, 1967, 13 months to the day. So is 13 a number associated with Mothman? Some people say yes. From the first reported sighting. In the midst of heavy traffic, the Silver Bridge collapsed due to one eye bar, supporting a suspension chain breaking, causing a chain reaction that led to the deaths of 46 people. In the midst of the confusion, Mary Hyre would see her dream come to life, and other residents reported the presence of Mothman nearby, although this is something that is debated. Some people say, yeah, it was on the bridge. Other people said it was just in a tree nearby or what have you. But the fact of the matter is, as far as sightings go, they kind of die after this. So this is a huge part of the story. And one of the reasons why people believe Mothman is that harbinger of doom. So where does this leave you, Joe?
I think it leaves it largely with a measure of impossible to like this aspect of it is impossible to debunk, but also impossible to prove. I will say that the further that you get into with this event, there was an associated sighting with this event. There are some photos and some things that people get that you've got to squint and cock your head and jump up on one leg and do all kinds of craziness in order to like see what people are seeing. And so I think there is plenty of room that people can associate different tragedies with this, all of that kind of stuff. Um who knows? You know what I mean? Like when it comes
Yeah.
to what was so special, if this really was prophetic and all of that kind of stuff, what who knows what um the
purpose, design.
Well, yeah, well, yes, but what was the significance maybe
There you go.
of of this moment in history, right? This bridge collapse. Was there something more to this? Is there something about this in history's timeline that if this didn't happen, something like, you know what I mean? Like, was somebody saved by something that happened, and thus now there's something that, the course of history was forever changed? Who knows? But that aspect of it, I think, just to be honest, this is probably the point where my skepticism shows the most, because there is such a nebulous area to this aspect of it.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. It's one of those things. It does start that tying up of the bow a little bit because we still
Yeah.
don't get that at the end of the story. But it's like if I'm making a story, something is happening because we didn't even get to Indrid Cold and all that mess, and that's because he's probably the focus of his own episode.
Yeah.
Because there's some wild and wacky things that happen with him, and then the other Men in Black are like, is the Mothman, uh, the Men in Black, and Indrid Cold three different sides of some temporal Cold War where they have to cause the bridge collapse to save the world, or there was someone who needed to die on that bridge in order to just stop future President Hitler from coming in the United States, or what have you. Like, yeah, you
Right.
can argue that all day long. Maybe that's something that happened. I don't know. I don't think so, but I just made it up because it sounded fun. Like, if I'm making a story, I'm making something like this up. But it keeps going. There are other reports of Mothman after this, just not nearly as frequent as what happened here. I mean, recently in Chicago, people have been seeing him around the airport,
Right.
allegedly. Multiple sightings over multiple years. I've yet, thank God, no plane crashes happen in Chicago, if he is indeed such a harbinger of death in that aspect. Do I
Yeah.
think he was there at Chernobyl or Fukushima or at any of the towers on 9/11? No, I don't think that, but it makes a cool story. And I think
Yeah.
that's why people are spreading that around. So I think ultimately
Yeah.
this is just a tragedy. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you're probably onto something as far as this just being an associated tragedy. I think there's a possibility that, like, again, if we're gonna say that this is, again, a possibility, then we've got to at least articulate the fact that there could be other things at play, other supernatural aspects at play as well.
Yeah. So as far as like sightings are concerned, we're kind of done. Like there are smaller ones out there in other regions of the world. I mean, you've got your owl man in Cornwall, England. You've got uh, entities that fly around really all across the world. It's very, I mean, for uh, paranormal things, a common phenomena. And we could speculate more, but like, let's actually get into the nitty gritty. What the hell is this thing? And list off a couple of things. We mentioned demons being a thing before. There's a running gag on one of the show podcasts I love. It's Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. It's like it's always demons or it's always aliens, and because they're making fun of the fact that that's where people go. Is Mothman some demonic entity? I'll throw it into the pile. I haven't seen like something that would make me go, "Yep, I'm on this side right here," and we should probably get the crucifix out and get Father Harris and get things done. Like, no, but as far as like an extraterrestrial origin, Joe, what do you think about that?
So I guess it depends on what form of extraterrestrial that we're talking. If we're just talking this idea of it is alien to this earth but comes from this dimension and all of that, I'm far less inclined to think that that's the explanation. Personally, that's also because as I've stated, I'm inclined away from thinking that way. As far as the like a different within our dimension, extraterrestrial, I think the most plausible to me explanation is the fact that this is something extra dimensional that we just don't fully understand.
And we'll get to that in a little bit. As far as extraterrestrial is concerned,
Mhm.
like if anything makes me go that way, it's that we do have multiple UFO sightings here. It's that we have the men in black involved, that we have this mysterious Indrid Cold guy around. It just the grinning man acts so weird around people, doesn't really understand our customs or something like that. But that could once again be explained by the ultra terrestrial, the extra normal. We'll get to that in a second. But
Yep.
I lean to extraterrestrial, ultra terrestrial ultimately out of all these. And it's because of like how Mothman works outside of what we would assume is in nature with the flight we brought up earlier, with the interference with radio signals and stuff like that. That tells me maybe some alien technology is messing with things. So that's how he's able to, vertically take off and land at, speeds that we're not capable of yet. Maybe that's just some suit it's in. Like, who knows? That's a possibility, but I don't put all my cards on that one. I'm not betting on
Right.
black here. Now, ultra terrestrial. This is a term that Keel does come up with later on. I'm fairly certain it doesn't appear at all in the Mothman prophecies, but it's this idea of a being outside of our dimensional understanding that has somehow crossed over our way through some other reality or something that we barely understand, that has different rules in place for the physics that work there, for how biology works, and it has been trapped here through some unknown means, maybe some crack between dimensional barriers. And here we go. We got Mothman.
Mhm.
What do you think about that, Joe?
I would say out of all of the potential ideas, like I think I don't hate that a as an option, and I think it's a one that kind of is all encompassing in the way that it's um in the way that it's approached. You know what I mean? Like I think it says that there's stuff outside of what we understand that we just simply can't understand, and that's got to be okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's just we're wired to want answers.
Yep.
We're wired. This makes sense because it's how things always work.
Yep.
But we're also limited by what point in history we're at. If I had been born 1,000 years ago, I have an infection in me. Well, the doctor says, "Here, I'm going to cut you open and put a leech on you."
Yeah.
I'm going to listen to what the doctor says because that's what science says at the time. That's what we understand the world, even though we know now how barbaric. How could anyone ever think that? Well, get your chronological snobbery aside there for a second. Be grateful you're at where you're at.
Yeah.
But that's what we had to start somewhere. So we don't have the science at this moment in time unless there's some secret hidden project out there. The Stargate program is real or what have you. And maybe we can transcend dimensional relativistic barriers into other realms or other
Yeah.
planets or what have you. Sure, possible, but I don't think we're there yet. And to say that because we're not there yet right now, that means no one else is capable of doing that. The universe is not going to have something like that happen. I don't buy someone saying that because they're just someone who doesn't want to believe, in my opinion, or
Yep.
doesn't want to at least think about the idea because it contradicts what they know.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's really what something like this comes down to, right? Like the part of where it almost with something like this, it almost ends up in a similar spot to like the to like the movie or to like the book or whatever, that there is this almost non anticlimactic sort of finish to it, because you can't you cannot put a a pin in one specific explanation, but what you can say is there's not enough aspects to this that say I am absolutely not going to believe any of this because I want to, you know, remain a diehard skeptic and all of that kind of stuff, and this is just the way that I'm going to be, and I'm so closed off to anything else. Like that's just not what's there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. It's, I mean, obviously we're how many 50 plus years removed from the events. The harder, the faster away, it's not faster. The further away you get from something, the harder it is to prove.
Yep.
So this is what we have evidence presented in front of us. We either trust it or we kind of trust it or we don't. I lean towards kind of trust for the most part. Now we get to one of my least favorite explanations ever. The bane of my existence. This stupid bird, the
Yep.
sandhill crane.
The sandhill crane.
Yeah, if it didn't go against everything I believe in, I would lead to systematic extermination of the species, just so it could never be brought up again. For those of you
Yeah.
not in the know, a sandhill crane is a guess what, a bird that exists typically more northern. It does appear southern sometimes, but in this region it is known to inhabit West Virginia. It is just a little size comparison here. These are little, not juveniles, they're a little younger. They can get to about 5 to 6 feet tall. So it is possible, and I'm being very generous, it is possible for someone in the midst of darkness to see this thing out and about, eye shine comes away, its wingspan is very massive, and go, oh no, that's some freaky thing from another dimension or an alien being.
Yeah.
But every single time, people who live in that area, who know these critters, who have probably hunted some of these critters, and you're going to tell me they misidentify it every single time?
Every single
I'm
time.
willing to believe. I'm willing to believe some fantastical things. Yeah, my best friend was born in the manger after all. But there's some things that I got to stop and go. You just want an explanation for something that doesn't make sense because you're not willing to go the extra mile here.
Yeah. 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 I agree. I think that that's something that is emblematic of just reaching for a specific explanation just for the sake of having an explanation rather than trying to actually articulate and do scientific justice. It's just grabbing for something just for the sake of
Yes.
something.
Now, one that I'm a little more lenient on because look at that sucker. That, my friends, is an owl. You
Yep.
know what that eye shine is? Red. You know what that isn't, though? Very big. So, unless there's some irradiated owl out there from dealing with all the, shall we say, messed up things in the munitions plant, the TNT area that became this 50 science fiction monster because that's how radiation works. I don't buy it. Even
Yeah.
me, scientific dum dum, knows that's not how radiation works. Radiation means cancer, not superpowers.
Yep.
So if I see that out and about in the woods, I'm going to be scared for a second because I'm not prepared for it. But guess what? They also know what owls are. And as we have a good little comment here. Thank you, Chester's Views. Yeah, that is a bit ridiculous. Typical modern humanity. Couldn't agree more. Uh, I think that's. I think it's some people just don't have the capability within themselves to be willing to say, I don't know,
Yeah.
because I don't know is scary. I don't
Yep.
know means the world doesn't work like I think it should.
Yep.
Yeah, that's true. It's scary to say I don't know because that means you don't know. But it's okay to say that when you're dealing with something that is fantastical, is a bit outside of your experience. So while I could believe someone would misidentify this sucker, even right now, I'd be capable of doing that. But also recognize owls aren't that big. They don't fly at 100 miles per hour. Uh, they're not capable of the feats that we've seen so far.
Well, like you said, um, radiation equals cancer, not superpowers. And so we need to be willing to articulate the fact that this doesn't make any sense by the laws of like what these theories posit is closer to debunkable than the quantum theory components that we discussed earlier. It's just the reality. Like, you've
Yeah.
gone further outside of what is scientifically possible by going to trying to stick to a naturalistic explanation than like just saying like quantum theory dictates that this thing is possible and it's possibly an entity from a different dimension.
So let's go to another hypothesis, that being hallucinations. Everyone's favorite thing to throw out when the sandhill cranes fail. You can't prove that, when Jesus came back to life that he was a sandhill crane. You got to throw hallucinations out. Everyone saw the exact same thing because that's how our brains are wired. Your hallucinations are always going to be the same as mine, Joe. Didn't you know that?
Yeah,
Didn't you know that your biochemistry is the same as mine? Your
exactly.
mental faculties are the same as mine. It is possible that two people could hallucinate the same thing. It is vastly improbable that every single person hallucinated the same thing, in which I would question what were they on, what was running in the water, what is happening, that they're all seeing this thing. And even then, if those things would have happened, if someone would have slipped some hallucinogen into the waterworks of the local dam or whatever for Point Pleasant, they're not going to see the same thing because they're not the same person. You're going to see something vastly different than me under those circumstances. So I throw that out of
Right.
the loop. That's another one of those thrown because I don't like the answer, so I'm going to say hallucination.
Yeah, I agree. I think that so this kind of goes in the same arena as um some of the other um issues that tend to center around I'm gonna I'm not gonna understand this, so call it a I'm gonna call it a everybody was just mass hallucinations and all of that kind of stuff. You need to understand what mass hallucinations are and how they work in order for this to be an actual understandable explanation. And the reality is that that's not how, like, multisensory, multimodal mass hallucinations don't really happen unless there's some kind of like agent for it, like a hallucinogenic or something along those lines. So again, this is further outside of the confines of what is the most probable explanation.
All right. That takes us to our next one. You don't typically see this thrown around, but I like to bring it up because it causes controversy sometimes for some reason. That being the fair folk. Now, for those of you who don't know, the fair folk are the fairies. They're that typical idea you get from more your English, Scottish, Irish, Welsh folklore of these mystical beings that sometimes live within the same dimension as us, sometimes don't. So maybe fairies or ultra terrestrials, who knows? It's they work on a magic in a way that we don't understand. They just kind of it's hard to explain the fair folk, and the reason I keep saying fair is because, like in the legends, if you called them anything but fair, you were showing favoritism to one over the other.
Yeah.
And that's a good way to get a bunch of pissed off fae heading your way, because why would you dare love them over me? It, it's a wild, wacky mythology. It's something that could be a thing. It's like, maybe if such beings were to exist. Is it possible? Yes. Is it something I'm going to put a lot of credibility behind? No, until further evidence is presented. But I didn't want to throw it out there. And we get another comment here from Chester's Reviews. Yeah, swamp cats, I believe, was a going theory I heard. Welcome to ufology. If you can't explain it, a weather balloon, swamp gas.
It's swamp gas. It's swamp gas or weather balloon. That's it. We've figured it out, guys. Guys, contact the presses. Stop tomorrow's edition. We have the explanation from Mothman. Guys, it's Swampcast. No, I'm playing. I'm joking. I know who Chester's reviews. Chester's reviews are easy for me to say. He is the man behind Chester's reviews. Ed, you're killing me here with that name, bro. I know the guy. Yeah, that is an explanation that got used before that. Like, that's a thing, and like
That it's either that or the planet Venus or
it's something
some
like
other
that. I mean,
phenomenon that
it's
we're
kind of
just too
like
stupid to
inhaling
understand.
water. It's kind of like inhaling hard water vapor. We all know that that's going to give you superpowers and give you super speed. Like 3 people got that
Oh,
joke, and that's okay. I'm cool with it.
there you go. All right, last one. There's more out there, but I also find this fun because I think they're fun ideas. What if this is a possibility? Something that could be real? A tulpa, also known as a sprolpa, that kind of comes from Tibetan Buddhist mythologies, mysticism that has been brought over, unfortunately, some by theosophists, which are also another one of the banes of my existence as far as how many very bad ideas they make. But it's the idea that collectively, assuming a human unconsciousness or even through a human will, you can create a thought being or a thought creature.
They're also
Now,
connected just to for some. There's Judaism is there. There's some slight connection to some sects of Judaism, it being like in the mystical side of that thought
like
process as
Kabbalah.
well. Yeah,
Yeah.
uh, it's yeah. I mean, possible, but that's kind of like saying that poltergeist energy is a thing as well.
So, yeah, certainly, if is it possible for us to create a being? Yes and no, maybe. As far as like something I would like to happen, because I also know what people are capable of thinking about. Is it possible that we actually made the Slender Man come into existence to cause 2 girls to kill another friend out there, all the way out west? I hope not. I hope the Slender Man isn't out there, or that the Mothman wasn't created. Which, by the way, how did that come into being? Did a bunch of government agents for MK Ultra decide that, hey, we're going to screw over this town in West Virginia, and we need you all to be thinking, guys? As I know you're trying to stare at those goats and kill them, but right now we need to, just focus on this Mothman guy. It's going to be the biggest rage. Like,
Look,
sure.
I'm gonna put it out there. Do I think that something like MK Ultra is something that the government would do? Absolutely. Do I
Yes,
think
absolutely, yes.
do I think that the brain is a fascinatingly powerful thing? Absolutely. You do the math.
So that's that as far as like explanations go. So,
Yep.
Joe, thank you for joining me for this episode. Like, I knew bringing you along, we would just talk and have fun and just geek out of this really wacky thing that neither of us are close in age to have been around for, but can still appreciate the value of.
Yeah.
So, thank you for
Yeah.
everyone who was listening. Go ahead.
If there's anything that you can pull out from this one, guys, just eh, don't just make sure that you are approaching life from a standpoint of be open to what is possible, because if nothing else it's just a fun thing to kick the can around about, but like also what if, that's all, what if.
What if indeed? So, thanks to all the listeners who stuck around and they left some comments here. We always appreciate you guys doing that. Please, if you get a chance, just like this video, share it, leave some comments there as well to help other people see it. It's how it gets more people involved with this series, as well as systematic ecology in total for YouTube. So, with that, dear listeners, what do you believe? Is the Mothman real? A hoax? An ultra terrestrial? Swamp gas? Something else? We didn't touch on everything that the night has to offer this evening. So let us know in the comments below if there's something you'd like us to do a follow up on. In the description below, you can find the sources used for tonight's program. Read one, The Mothman Prophecies, John Keel. Read it. Excellent book. Next time in March, we'll be moving on to our next category, religious strangeness, where we'll be discussing the possible whereabouts of the Ark of the Covenant. See ya.